Well, the Senate is back in session after the August recess, and Congress is facing a looming deadline to avoid a government shutdown. Lawmakers now have less than a month to pass spending bills that would keep the government funded, but conservative Republicans are pushing for new deep cuts, and they want more funding for some of their priorities, like a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. The White House is calling on congressional Republicans to commit to funding the government without those conditions. More on all of this, Christina Ruffini and Scott MacFarlane join us now. Christina is a CBS News correspondent. She's at the White House. And Scott is CBS News congressional correspondent. Welcome to you both. I want to get to that spending showdown in a moment, but a few health matters to discuss first. So, Scott, let's start with you and with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who is back in D.C. with the rest of the Senate today. And a short time ago, he made an oblique reference to that episode where he appeared to freeze up a few days ago when speaking to reporters. Let's listen to what he had to say about it on the Senate floor.
Now, one particular moment of my time back home has received its fair share of attention in the press over the past week. But I assure you, August was a busy and productive month for me and my staff back in the Commonwealth.
So acknowledging the issue, but not really addressing it head on or answering any questions. Scott, is his office providing any more information about what might be ailing him?
His office is speaking through the Office of the Attending Physician, Congress's in-house doctor, releasing two statements over the past few days, one of which last week didn't quiet much of the questions or the concerns because it acknowledged the physician hadn't actually examined McConnell directly. But in a statement today, the physician says he did examine McConnell and some MRI results and has ruled out a seizure disorder, a stroke, or Parkinson's. What the Office of the Attending Physician has said over the past few days is what we've seen could be consistent with dehydration and complications from the concussion, a severe concussion McConnell suffered in March at a D.C. hotel fall. McConnell had a chance to answer any number of questions today. We were there. We were peppering him with questions. He didn't take them or address them. And you characterized it quite well, Nancy. He answered it only obliquely during his expected Senate remarks today.
I noticed that one of his Republican colleagues, John Cornyn, said that McConnell wants to be more transparent, but apparently that hasn't happened yet. Perhaps it will happen, Cornyn said, tomorrow when Senate Republicans sit down for their weekly lunch. On another health matter, Christina, the First Lady, was diagnosed with COVID yesterday. This afternoon, we saw the president wearing a mask at a Medal of Honor ceremony, although he didn't keep it on the entire time. What is the White House saying about the First Lady's condition and about testing for the president?
That's right, Nancy. So at the briefing, we were asking many questions about what the protocols are going to be since he and the First Lady were together all weekend in Florida. They were in Florida on Friday touring that hurricane damage. Then they were at their Delaware beach house. Over the weekend, the First Lady tested positive on Monday. The president returned to the White House. She's still there in isolation. But obviously, they were in very close contact. So the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, said today that the president, since the president was with the First Lady yesterday, he will be masking while indoors and around people in alignment with CDC guidelines. And about 30 minutes after she said that, we saw the president at this Medal of Honor ceremony where he wore a mask as he entered the room, took it off to make his remarks, and then didn't put it back on to be into close contact with the other octogenarian who was receiving this award. So we've reached out to the White House for comment as to how that kind of works with what we were told the president was going to be doing. We've yet to hear back. The other issue is the president has scheduled a big diplomatic trip to Asia. He's going to go to Delhi for the G20 and then to Vietnam, at least he's supposed to, on Thursday. Now, the question hanging over this trip is, will the president stay healthy enough? Will he test positive between now and that set departure on Thursday? We also asked the White House how often he's testing, what the cadence of testing is going to be leading up to that trip. And they wouldn't comment. They said he's tested negative in the last 24 hours. Once in the morning, once in the evening. And we said, is that going to be, is that going to be the procedure? Is that going to be, we're going to continue seeing those tests 2 times a day? And the press secretary wouldn't tell us. She said that testing will be up to the president and his doctors.
Yeah, I guess they're taking a wait and see approach because they also won't tell us whether the vice president, who's already in Asia, will end up pinch hitting for the president in India and in Vietnam if he does test positive sometime in the next few days and can't make that trip. All right, Scott, let's turn to the increasingly real potential of a government shutdown. What are conservative House members demanding in exchange for their votes to keep the lights on? And how is the Senate reacting now that it's back?
We're 25 days from the deadline, and there's still no sense of anybody trying to merge or find consensus here. There's two different areas in which Republicans and Democrats are differing at this moment. The overall dollar amount. House Republicans want to chop it down by tens of billions of dollars, but also some of the language they've included in the House bills, just non-starters with Democrats in the House and in the Senate. Cuts to climate change initiatives, diversity programs in the federal government, money that orders increases in the spending on the border wall, that Trump campaign idea from 2016, which continued through his administration. Our reporting shows that the next bill the House is going to take up and try to pass is this Homeland Security spending bill, about $62 billion worth. That includes all those things I just mentioned, border wall money and cuts to climate change initiatives and diversity programs. They're not going to get Democratic votes for this when it goes to the House floor, if it clears the Rules Committee 1 week from today. But even if it did, it's a non-starter in the Senate. So we get perilously close to the September 30th deadline, and both sides are just digging in to a messaging argument and bills they know aren't going to pass the other chamber, which reminds me an awful lot, Nancy, of that debt ceiling standoff, which went down to the final hours.
Right. And I was going to say, if it seems familiar to people, this fight that we're watching play out, it's because we did just watch it play out. In May, there was a protracted, painful negotiation between the White House and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, where they set spending limits for the next couple of years so that we wouldn't watch what we are watching right now, and yet it is happening anyway. So, Scott, it would seem that the House Speaker is now in a major bind here. He just cut this deal with the White House in May. Now conservatives want him to break the deal. If he goes along with them, it'll undercut his ability to negotiate in the future. But if he doesn't accommodate them, they could sink his speakership. How real is that threat?
There is a needle he has to thread. You characterized it well, but what's clear to me, more people I talk to as these days go by, is there is a case of buyer's remorse from some of these Republicans for the deal Speaker McCarthy cut to avert the debt ceiling crisis. And they have been looking to atone for that ever since. Here comes September 30th and a deadline for a government shutdown, which by all accounts, especially from House Republicans, would have less pain, immediate pain on the U.S. economy. They're spoiling for a fight that is now quickly approaching.
Christina, turning to foreign affairs, you asked the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan today in the White House briefing room about the news that Russia may be seeking weaponry from North Korea, of all places, and that Putin and Kim Jong-un might actually meet to discuss it later this month. What did he tell you? And does North Korea even have a large stockpile of weapons to give Russia in the first place?
Well, that was my question, and I didn't know if it was a dumb question or not, but Sullivan said it's something the U.S. intelligence is actually looking into because it's unclear how many weapons, what kinds of artillery they would have, and the quality of that artillery. But the follow-up question, we asked was, is this enough weaponry, or is this enough artillery to impact the outcome of the war one way or the other? And this is the answer he gave us. I think we've got it for you.
Our visibility into both the question of quantity of stocks and then, of course, quality of stocks is somewhat constrained, but it's something that we will continue to look at carefully. I think there is an open question about how much material and what the quality of the material is that could be provided if it were to be provided. And then I think it says a lot that Russia is having to turn to a country like North Korea to seek to bolster its defense capacity.
But Sullivan did say, look, these discussions between the North Koreans and the Russians, U.S. intelligence believes they are real, they are progressing. It's not clear yet if it's a matter of really wanting this material support or if it's a matter of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? You have these two nations who are pretty much isolated. They're antagonistic with the United States. It may be more of a diplomatic antagonistic move more than an actual military asset. But either way, it's something the U.S. is intensely watching, and we'll have to see what comes of it.
It definitely speaks to how few friends Russia has in this fight, if it's turning to North Korea at all. Christina Ruffini and Scott MacFarlane, thank you so much.